Welcome to the Conjugate Nation podcast.
Back again. Episode 13, lucky 13? Question mark? I don't know. I feel like maybe it's lucky. We'll see how it goes. So I guess actually today is happening because of one of the things that crossed my mind a week ago. We had a couple of teens. We wrapped up one of our Friday teens training sessions with what seemed like a good idea to me at the time, which was we're just going to go last person standing for plank plate slide. So in a plank position, sliding like a 10-pound steel plate back and forth across the floor, sort of like directly under your rib cage. And in my mind, I felt like this was going to cap out around 8 or 9 minutes. And of the 16 athletes, all but 2 were done by 7 minutes. But the last 2 were not going to let the other person win. And so one of our guys and one of our girls went head to head, sliding that plate back and forth. And the rule was, if you stop, you're out. You stop sliding that plate, you're out. You lift your hips up to like take a bit of a rest or reprieve, you're out. Like super straightforward. Should have taken a lot less time. At the like 10 to 15 minute mark, the one kid, he was like beet red, dripping sweat. I was like, all right, he's got like another couple minutes and we're good. Get to 20 minutes, get to 25, 30, 35, like around 40 minutes. He's like, are you getting tired? And she's just like, nope. And they keep going. And at 50 minutes, I'm like, look, if you guys make an hour, we're going to call it a draw. 60 minutes. They made it. Like sliding that plate back and forth for 60 minutes. I sat there the whole time visiting with them because I was like, man, if they're keen, who am I to stop them? But just such a, like, I mean, I thought about it all weekend long because like they're not necessarily fitter or have a higher physical capacity than any of the other teens. The difference was there was just no world where they were giving up that spot to the other person. And it's crazy. So she got up and she'd been like stone cold the whole time, but both hands tore, like blistered, opened up, and she never stopped to even look at what her hands looked like. But both had like torn open through just like the pressure on the rubber floor after 60 minutes of that, right? Pretty cool piece and pretty cool example of just like mental fortitude and resilience. Because there's no way that 2 kids make 60 minutes and third place is 7 minutes. And that's equal that's representative of strength and physical capacity. I mean, it was pretty cool. Then because of that, I was like, man, it would be really cool to talk with the team about age, actually, and so everything from, I mean, youth to the oldest athletes that we've got in the gym, both training for like health, longevity, and then also for competition. So here we are, episode 13, talking about age, young to old as fuck.
It goes along with, some of the principles we talk about in here, right? Like you hear us mention that, training shouldn't only build you physically, should build you psychologically as well. But a well laid out training program should be a roadmap to why you're going to be better. When we start working with kids, we take like the youngest age, right? The first thing we want to do is GPP, general physical preparedness. We need to build a work capacity. The bigger work capacity we can build, the better we are, in the future for our training, right? So there's a couple things that, we've always emphasized. And one would be concentration movement, like gymnastics, right? We want good body awareness. So putting people in a lot of different positions. GPP for young kids, getting a conditioning level up. What's pretty sad is like usually like we'll get kids, say, playing football, sports like that, and we'll get them weight training. We'll do some cardio because that's part of the sport. And then every time they're in trouble, we're going to throw cardio their way. It's like, oh, you guys didn't practice hard today. So at the end, 2-mile run with full pads on. So it's really nice that we teach them that cardio is a bad thing and it's a punishment. It's a good way to keep people growing as adults doing cardio, right? So I say that just joking because in all honesty, when we're looking at programming for young kids, what we want to do is we want them to get excited about finding weaknesses. Every time they find a weakness is an opportunity to make a big change, big improvement in output and sport, right? But, kids and a lot of people look at having something that you're not good at as a negative thing. For me, if I have a kid a young child that plays a sport, like say soccer, and they're the best one in their position, but they have a lot of deficiencies, then I'm like, whoa, this kid could potentially really be something because they're already number one on the field, but they have all these deficiencies in physical output, right? So, for us, GPP is huge. We get people in really good condition. That's the first thing we want to build is work capacity, and then we want to build body awareness. So there's two things that we like for this. One, gymnastics is great because there's a lot of good balance and body awareness in those movements, and then like a lot of strongman stuff. So strongman stuff like carries and picking stuff up. When kids are real young, it's hard to teach them really good movement and say like a squat or a deadlift because if you notice, like little kids tend to be all over the place with their limbs and stuff, right? But if they hold on to a ball and hold it in the chest and they walk with it, or they're holding something and walking with it, they're dragging something like a sled. If they're flipping a small tire, flipping that tire teaches them how to sumo deadlift. But yet that you will notice it's easier to teach a kid perfect technique on a tire to flip than it is to teach them a sumo deadlift. It's not that you can't do it, but not all kids have that really good body awareness. For us, that work capacity and doing those hard movements are good because when we go back to barbell movements won't feel as physically demanding as a lot of these strongman movements were. And so for us, it's almost like they feel like, oh, that's easy, right? But they don't shy away from the hard stuff. So it's actually, we start with the hard stuff and we work our way towards, the easy stuff. And when I say easy, a 1 rep max isn't easy on anything, but this is what we worked on, a technique and something that's very skilled, like a sumo deadlift. We can pinpoint and make it extremely accurate, right? That doesn't feel as hard output wise as doing a tire flip or doing a yoke walk, things like that. So, we will build GPP, work on movement quality, and then after that we'll start going towards our strength and conditioning. But a lot of people tell me, like, the last day, well, what age group can they start lifting heavy? And the funny thing is, man, if you have a bunch of boys, you take them out and say a bunch of 10-year-old boys, and your kid, it's his birthday, invites his friends over, and you have a bunch of rocks out in the backyard. Kids aren't going back there and saying, okay, what's 70% of the heaviest stone you can lift? We want to see you lift that. No, they're finding the stone they think might be too big that nobody can lift, but the one that maybe someone can lift. And then everybody's going to try it. And if they can't do it, they'll go to the next biggest one, the one down from that, until one person hits it, right? There's not a kid out there who's going to go, okay, that stone's about 100% of my max. That looks about 70%. At my age, I'm going to lift that 3 times, and I'll call it there, right? Kids aren't doing
these
that,
days,
okay?
maybe.
No, true.
Things have changed a little bit.
Yeah, right. But like we would climb up and climb up on like a TV antenna and say, okay, I'm going to jump off the 10th ring, and then your friend goes, oh yeah, they go up to the 11th one, they jump off. Well, I can do the 12th one, and you're going to go to see how high you can go, right? Basically, what I'm getting at is what your child does when they're jumping up to grab a rebound from a basketball, the pressures in their hips when they change direction playing hockey, the jumping for a long jump. All of these impacts will be substantially higher pressure than anything they're ever going to squat, bench, or deadlift. Okay? The strongest guy in the world right now is Dave Hoff. Dave Hoff came out of Westside Barbell. He started lifting at Westside Barbell at 14 years old. If you look at his brothers, his dad, they're all the same height. He's not shorter than the rest of his family is. They're all similar heights, right? So, there's a lot of misconception and things out there. But in our belief, the biggest thing is get a work capacity first, get body awareness, and then start, chopping those things down. It's not that I don't lift heavy with young kids. I do. I just do when it's a proper time for it. And that's kind of the direction we go. What about you guys? What about you, Chris?
Well, I mean, first, that story is just amazing. 60 minutes. I'm still wrapping my mind around
right.
It was crazy.
Second. Yeah, that is crazy. I'm just still, I sure as heck can't even hold a regular plank for 60 minutes. But I mean, it also, like, I think teenagers are great little insights into adults as well. Is, how cool is it for those kids? You say they're not the strongest ones, but they got to show up to class and, be the winner in that class. And I think finding, wins for all your people. So your teenagers, and, I think that's what keeps them coming back into the gym is they can do things that others can't. Same thing you're talking about, Shane, on the outside, who can jump off the highest rings and all those things. Yeah, I'm very similar. I do a lot of the GPP conditioning stuff. And interesting, I just started working with like the 13s to 18-year-olds a lot more seriously when we moved out here. So about almost 3 years ago. And initially you kind of trying to do stuff like you do with adults, and then I realized like
Mm.
simplify it because their movement patterns aren't good enough, so they don't need buffalo bars and safety squat bars. Like they're still learning how to use a regular barbell. So that's one thing I think has resonated with me more. Shane, and you talked about this, like as your athletes become more advanced, you add 15% of exercises. So make your athletes earn those exercises, and the teenagers have definitely been that way. Like it's just constantly your squats, your conventional deadlifts, your sumos. But yeah, I like adding in gymnastics. I talked a little bit last week with doing some technique work for Oli. We had some kids who were beat up from the end of the season for football, and the same thing for throughout the season we would have gymnastics work. So they'd come in, we do handstand, we get them on their hands, get them inverted, work on handstand walks. I mean, got a kid that can easily walk 50 feet on his hands now, that really wasn't doing that before. We got a couple kids that couldn't do muscle ups, where now we've got them on rings, and you're doing the muscle up progressions with them, but they're really just hitting ring dips, ring rows, working on hangs. So during the season that was a big, because it's not going to beat them up more, and they were doing a lot of stuff in for practices. And this is three of the kids' first year going through a full season. And all of them were a little bit nicked up throughout the season. So those things can be just good ways of moving them through the season.
And Chris, like you were talking about those teenagers getting more and more movements. And, we talk about constant variation on here all the time. Just because we talk about it doesn't mean that everybody's thinking about all the ways we can utilize it. And just think of what gets kids excited, right? They play a video game, they beat the boss at the end of the level, and then the next level has new things to go against they never got to experience before. So it's like, oh, look at these new, like, the new bad guys or the new backgrounds or the different weapons you have, like, right? They get excited every time something's new. So the great thing with that is adding 50% new exercises is not just to optimize the athlete, right? As far as learning new movement fast, it's also to keep them excited and wanting to train. There are some sports that are very simple and that you can't start kids too young because of the psychological burnout, because there's not enough stimulation to keep them going for long periods of time. Like 100-meter sprinters, they say that you usually shouldn't start them before 13 years old if you want to make them to the Olympics and win Olympic gold. Before then tends to be too long a run because the sport is pretty simple. Once they learn how to run the 100, the only attributes you can work on is increase their force rate production, how much, what is their acceleration phase. You want to extend the acceleration phase and shorten the maintenance phase, right? So it's not extremely stimulating like teaching someone MMA, where they're constantly evolving, the sport's evolving with them, and they're constantly running into opponents that have different attributes that they have to train for. So when you have coaches like Chris who are opening up more and more movement variations to athletes, it does quite a few things. One, it keeps your kids excited and happy and in the gym and wanting to do it and not thinking that it's a boring thing or monotonous that they have to do over and over again. Once it levels up, somebody might say, well, who cares if this kid's a football player and can do handstand walks? Maybe handstand walk is not the game changer. Maybe it is. Maybe it creates stabilization in the shoulder for that athlete that was needed so they don't get a massive injury, right? But even if that kid likes to show off to his friends that he can do that, what's he going to want to do? Stay in good enough shape to do that, right? So if that's the motivation to keep them going, it doesn't really matter what it is. The individual's learning new movements, they're becoming more athletic, and they're giving themselves only more reasons to want to stay in the gym and keep going and doing what they're doing. So when working with kids, this is an extremely important thing for us to do, is keep that psychological state there, keep them wanting to learn, keep them excited about being in. And, when we're talking to people like Jesse and Chris, you can see all the different variations they do. And one of the things that Jesse did, which is great, is by bringing in that plank and have them slide that plate. Is that a plank that you see all the time in the gym? No. Most 90% of people have heard of it who are listening to this podcast and have maybe done it, but it's not common, right? But when you bring in movements to people, and you might have, like Jesse's kids might have been like similar to the other kids that were going against them in strength, but they have their win. Because what if those kids aren't the ones who are going to win squat and bench and deadlift, but you only do squat, bench, and deadlift? They're always at the back and they think that they're poor athletes. But when you have enough variation, they realize they're not poor athletes. They know what their wheelhouse is, which means now they know what their weaknesses are. And if their weaknesses are involved in the sports they want to play, then they have to fix those. Their weaknesses might not be involved in the sports they play, might not be something that needs to be addressed at a high level, but they will understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, and they will understand why they get beat in some things, and they'll also understand why they don't like getting beat. And maybe they look at the other things and go, okay, well, I beat this individual in this one. They beat me in one movement. I beat them in one movement. That means like I can't beat them. I have to put effort into the things they're beating me in. And it gives them an opportunity to be competitive, right? But you have to give, it's kind of goes with the whole concept of CrossFit. If all the workouts were the same people would win. The people who win would always stay at the gym. The people who didn't win would eventually leave the gym because they get bored and they never win anything. They never have their day. But if you look at CrossFit programming, you look at every gym member has their day to shine because we all work on different strengths and weaknesses. So when we're working on just the strength, strength conditioning portions for athletes for specific sports, we can't like deny that either, right? So like what Jesse's doing and Chris is doing, what we're doing with that constant variation is giving people an opportunity to win, which makes the people who are used to winning when they take a loss, well, if they don't like that feeling, what are they going to do? They're going to train hard and get really good at those things they're losing at because they don't like to lose. What's that person who's never had a win before do? They got their first win. You get your first win, you got a taste of that. That's a good taste that you want to feel again, right? So now everybody in that room just leveled up just on the basic fact that you had enough variation to bring a new challenge to something and get other people to shine.
Yeah, and I think that's a big principle, even with the, obviously the CrossFit Kids course and a lot of the trainers we have in there. Find ways to make it fun. I mean, you can still make it hard and make it fun. And one of the reasons that we're doing some of that gymnastics work is like the kids would always, I'd start hearing them, outside the gym, talking about doing those. And right now, the big thing with all of the teenagers right now is bar muscle ups.
Yeah.
But, just trying not to get them to like just walk into the gym and do a
Just
bar
straight
muscle
up.
Yeah, exactly. And it's
Is
like
there
come
any
in
other way to
cold.
do it?
Exactly. So it's like, well, if you guys are going to do this on your own, we'll go ahead and teach it. That's fun. And as you get some of those kids to learn those skills. I mean, same thing with the bar muscle. We've got quite a few kids now and now it's the problem is trying to teach them like, don't, just because you can do it, don't walk into the gym and do it cold. Like, already got one kid nick a shoulder up and it's like, well, yeah, it's like you're walking into the gym and just, doing cold bar muscle ups. But it became fun. It opened up a new skill and now they want to be able to show, friends they have skill and their friends now want to learn how to do that. And it's, I think, working hard can be fun and it should be fun. And just understanding how to kind of create a balance with that. And again, I think that's that insight I was saying in the beginning. It's adults are really just the same way.
Yeah, they are. Doesn't matter the age group, and you need to solidify. But if you can get that, what's important with the kids though is it's the same for adults that you have to have that variation, right? You have to build that excitement. But if you lose somebody as a kid, they might not ever come back around to it to try it as an adult, right? Like, the whole point is if they come into you as a kid, you want this to be a lifelong thing for them. Constantly evolving themselves psychologically and physically, being a lifelong thing is phenomenal for quality of life, right? So we don't want to lose them in the fact. And what do we know about kids? Kids have a shorter attention span. They like the new shiny things, right? So the conjugate sequence system is like really like laid out perfect for them, that we have constant variation and we have things to work on. It's just, what do we choose to work on? Like I said, we work on that conditioning. Why do you work on conditioning first? Well, you want to build a work capacity. The bigger the work capacity, the faster they can recover. The faster they can recover, the more volume you can give them, the faster you can make change in sport. But you also want that work capacity so they're never lifting heavy in a fatigue state. You look at a fighter when they're fresh, their hands are high, their movement's good, they're not flat-footed. What happens when they get fatigued? They're flat-footed, hands start to drop, they're not moving their head as much, and these all become things that are detrimental to winning, right? And he's like, well, why don't they keep their hands up? Well, they're fatigued, they're exhausted, they're tired. They can only do so much and they aren't in good enough condition for what they're trying to do right now. Since they're not, something's got to suffer. What suffers? Technique. What happens when technique suffers? Well, injuries and pain come, So what we want to do is build that capacity so that we can have the work capacity to build. If you're basically building the widest base for a pyramid that you can do. So the wider the base, the taller the pyramid. And that's what you're doing in your GPP. But you're also fortifying now when we start working on technique on heavier stuff, that the person will be in good enough condition that they won't break a position due to fatigue. And that's why those things are important.
So. Yeah, Jesse, you use a lot of strongman for conditioning in your kids too. And I know my kids love sandbag. They hate farmers carries, but they kind of like them, because they know it's, it's like, they know it's going to be a challenge. It's not going to be brutal, but by the end, they're definitely suffering. They love, bear hugs and stuff like that. You use a lot of strongman for your kids, right?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. Actually, strongman is what it saved the kids program for us. Like maybe a little more than 10 years ago. It's because we've been running kids program. I can't remember when we actually started, but it's got to be about 12 years or so.
Mm.
And we'd run it, and it was like there's some interest, and it was going okay, and we would have like seasons where we'd have like a couple of kids, and then a couple of kids isn't super fun for a class. And then you get a couple more, and then but you lose them, and it's kind of back and forth. And my business partner at the time, Heather, and I were talking about like, do we continue to do this? And the piece for me with youth in the gym has always been like, it's absolutely it's a critical component, you know. And I just had this conversation about having like if they were separated in a different space. Like, no, I don't want the youth separated. I want them to see the adults. I want them to like it's all part of like a bigger ecosystem, and then being able to learn and emulate. And one of the things that came up was I was leaving the gym one day, and you know those brown tubes, sauna tubes they use to pour cement pillars. So like 8, you can get them like anywhere from like I think 6 to like maybe 12, or probably huge. But so there's one of those in the dumpster out back behind the gym from the guys next door, and I was like, man, if only it was easy to build like a strongman log out of like something like that, you know. I was like, well, you could use a sauna tube. They're actually pretty resilient, but it'd just be like, wouldn't be loadable. Only a kid could use it. And then that was this epiphany where on the way home, I started thinking about like, well, man, I guess if you built like a wood frame inside of there, you could have this like really tiny, light strongman log. And if you use like black Gorilla tape and taped it, it would look like the steel Rogue training logs. And I was like, man, what else could you? I was like, I guess you could make like tiny little Iron Mine sandbags. That's just blue Cordura. So you just buy that same blue Cordura, just sew up a bunch of tiny bags that look like the Iron Mind, like World's Strongest Man ones. And I was like, I should see about if we could make smaller stones. And Slater Stones actually has molds that are 8 and 6 inches. Yeah. And I just started we started making everything. We built everything that the adults use and had it look exactly the same way, but tiny, including prowlers. We've got a prowler that's like maybe like 20 inches long, and it's like full length. And everything was built to scale. And then that kind of kicked things off. We started doing strongman as a primary focus for our youngest groups. So we started just building it in and became like, okay, what are the key principles that we really want to cover? And I feel like one of the biggest things I've learned over more than 10 years of like youth stuff is like, I've never been so patient as I am now in the sense of expectations and objectives. So, it's really easy to get sucked in by social media and be like, I saw this tiny little kid doing a 25 kilo snatch at like 4 years old. If you're doing that, maybe you're coming from an Olympic household where it is everything and it's going to pay off. But if you've got a kid who's snatching 25 kilos at 4 or 5 years old, there is zero better chance that they are still weightlifting by the time they're a teen and in their early 20s. It is not a correlate for this child being a world record holder in any fucking way, shape, and form, as far as like I'm concerned. And the more often you do that, the more athletes with great potential in their early years that we've seen fizzle out. So we've had kids competing in powerlifting at 11 and 12 years old. And by 14 years old, they're gone. Oh. The best lifter we've ever had as a teen, Kalen Smith, all he wanted to do was powerlift, and we wouldn't let him. And we just said no until he turned 16. So he was doing CrossFit. He was doing that. He was training hard, super motivated, but we held him back. Nope, you got to move better. We want to wait. It's not important. Like when you get there, you'll get there. At 16, we're like, all right, man. I think it was a month before his 16th birthday. And he started training with us. And his lifts at 16 were like 400 dead, 450 dead, 500 dead, 550 dead. Like every time he'd compete, he'd be putting on like 50 pounds on that barbell. And by 18, I mean, I think his best dead was like 628 at 18, squatting, I think in competition, 512.7, whatever it is in kilos, 232.5, and like huge lifts, right? And that was over, like, he basically ran those all up in a 2-year period, and we'd held him back the whole time, and it was so effective. And looking at that, then I stopped, and especially, I mean, you get great guys, like I mentioned earlier, like Nick Pappas, who's like total stud, Todd Widman, total stud. These guys who are like so amazing with youth. And you're like, yeah, those guys are probably got a tiny little team of like exceptional squatters, and they move super well. I mean, even think about Jeff and Mickey Martin. Is that right? Nicky Martin.
Mickey.
But I remember going to that kids course early on when they were still running it, and just watching their like example kids of this like little kid like crushing this like perfect squat, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's what I've got to accomplish. What I have learned over the years has been like, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. Because you think about, if you have an adult come into the gym, how long does it take you to get them to air squat if they're comfortable with range of motion, don't have injuries or issues? If they're a normal, healthy adult, how long does it take to get an air squat out of them? 10 minutes?
Very long, yeah.
Yeah. And when you're like, and so you roll that back to 3 and 4 year olds, and you're like, does it matter? Because my feeling is like, our classes are 3 to 4 year olds, 5 to 6 year olds, 7 to 8 year olds, 9 to 10 year olds, and then 10 to 12, and then 13 to 18. So our groups are actually more divided than they've ever been for age. And that was a massive success for us that we just kind of moved to actually only this semester that we're on right now. So we follow the school year. And the pieces of that are those youngest groups. So Ellen and I do the kids classes, and we get them for 30 minutes one time a week. How much time is valuable to spend perfecting an air squat? To me, it's very close to zero, because their ranges are already fine. They're healthy. It's just content for social media, in my opinion. What we spend our time on then is like more primal skills: push, pull, drag, run, jump, lunge. And when you can't do those things by yourself because the load exceeds what you can move, you start to have to figure out how to do it with other people. So like one of my favorite things is like watching a new group of kids with like a rope run out off a pulling sled, and watching them fail at pulling a sled as they're uncoordinated, and then stop them and be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Give me a 1, 2, pull. And when I say pull, we're all going to pull. And then watch them be like, holy shit, this totally works. And we can drag this heavy thing if 8 of us all work together and pull at the exact same time. I mean, you're always going to have one kid who's got one hand on his face in the wrong direction.
Of course.
But if you can get most of them coordinated pulling, and then by the next class, I mean, you repeat that, and they're like, we know what to do already. So they'll go right to it. So like, okay, and one kid starts saying, and then they're all saying it. And you're watching this little army of kids dragging, like, I mean, I can't remember what we had loaded on there like a couple weeks back. I was like, might've been like 300 pounds. And there's like, they're all in a tiny little row, like dragging this across the gym floor, and you see them get tired, and their hands are there like, oh, my hands. And these are all skills that like, that's what we're learning at like that age. I mean, and we'll as coaches, I've definitely found like in the last little while, it's like, if we can work in with them, that's like fun too. Like kids like to play. So if you can like play fitness with them, then they love that. Like I was doing suicide sprints with the like preteens on Thursday, and just crushing them. I'm so fast relative to preteen. They're like, okay, we'll get them on this next round. You're like, nope, no, you won't. But they're stoked. They're fired up. They're working twice as hard. and so stuff like that is like trying to work together as a group, and then putting pieces in there, like balanced pieces where, okay, like we'll see if Jesse falls off of this, and like it's just fun, right? So
Mhm.
for us, we're focusing on a ton of like playtime and fun that's strength based. And the idea is that we're working from like simple to complex the same way we would in a warm up, but we're doing it over like years. So those like 3 and 4 year olds, we're just having a great time. Jump, lunge, run the fuck out of them because they've got a ton of energy. I mean, it's not getting used in schools, at least here these days. So it's like you can push those kids hard inside of those sessions, and have it be super rewarding. I mean, parents will like text me like, "Oh man, we came home, that kid fell asleep eating dinner, like just on the kitchen table, just head on the table, out cold." And that's something that I feel like the three of us all would have grown up with, right? Like you play
Mhm.
outside until you're
Oh
exhausted.
yeah.
I mean, that's just not as much of a thing anymore as it used to be. So I feel like that environment in the gym is our opportunity to continue to be able for the next generations to also get that experience of like play. Because Shane's right. I mean, when you talk about like you go back and there's a pile of stones, I mean, they're not looking like, oh, this is a responsible stone to lift. The same thing Chris said about like bar muscle ups. It's never about being responsible. So
Huh.
they might as well learn to figure out how
Mhm.
to do it and like coordinate it and then work with others. So, I mean, man, you walk over those kettlebells and you're like, okay, we're going to grab some kettlebells for farmer's carry. You turn around for 1 second and the 32-kilo kettlebell is being clunked out of the rack. And every kid's having a go at who can
Mhm.
like sumo deadlift the
Yeah.
32-kilo kettlebell. And so you might as well just cover it off anyway because they're going to do it. And
Yeah.
those patterns, when you keep them like that, I mean, they're so simple. I mean, it's just basic pieces. I mean, one of those pieces I think from maybe Todd of like brace your hands on your knees like you're in a huddle before you put your hands on the kettlebell for a deadlift. Man, it just crushes for those kids. So they all put their hands on their knees, stick their butts out, chest up. I mean, they can get that position there, and you just take your hands off your knees, bend your legs a little bit, your hands are there, and they're in a great start position. As soon as it breaks down, okay, hands back to the knees, show me that huddle position. There's so many, look like a gorilla.
Yeah.
Those sort of like easy pieces are so fun. I mean, like watching kids develop like that is awesome. And then watching them
It's
figure that out and be able to replicate it on their own, and then see that not only is it like it's not an adult telling them they have to do this thing this way
Exactly.
because this is the rule. It's like, hey, if you want to be able to do this at all, you're going to have to do it this way or it will not move.
So think about the psychological development, right? So what we're doing is we're getting kids to build work capacity, but make it fun, right? So that they think training's fun and it's good. And the one thing that Jesse was talking about, like Jesse talked about then, is like, yeah, some kids nowadays aren't getting the experiences that we had growing up. When I knew it was a good day playing, and playing to me was playing sports, riding my BMX bike, where we're doing something active. That was playing, right? It's sometimes like maybe the last hour we're playing football or basketball or jumping ramps or whatever, my legs start aching. They were throbbing, aching, just hurting so bad. And nights when I'd ride my bike home back to back to my house, maybe I had a 15-20 minute ride home, and every single pedal stroke, my legs were aching. I was so excited. Then when I finally sat down and maybe watched some TV or ate something or whatever, my legs would just throb, right? And I thought that's when I knew as a kid, I'm like, oh, I had a good day. Like I had a good day playing that day. But then when it came to sports, and when I got a little bit older, I'm like, well, I have to push myself harder than that because that was just fun and there's no winning on the line. So if I'm willing to go to my legs ache and throb for fun, I have to push farther than that if I want to win, because that one was nothing was on the line. That was just me having fun, right? So if fun for a kid is they get to do something active for 2-3 minutes and it never has any fatigue in it, what's trying hard to them? Going 5-6 minutes with very minimal fatigue. But when a kid's playing and they get ultra fatigued and they're getting sore and they're getting, like little some aches because they push real hard, right? But they're happy about it. I think it leads to a different idea of a different pain threshold, which we know for athletes to succeed at the highest level, they have to develop a very high pain threshold. Whether you're an ultra distance runner or 1 rep max and a power lifter, it doesn't really matter. Strain is strain, right? And we'll all have some type of feeling of something that's very uncomfortable. So, like I always say, like one of the best things we can do for our kids is get them very good at being very uncomfortable when they're young. I know it sounds weird, but if they're very good at being uncomfortable and they never get uncomfortable, they'll always have their head in a really good spot to achieve their goals. They're not going to be concentrating on a feeling like, oh, this feels like a little too much, or I'm a little too tired, or I'm a little too worn out, or this is really uncomfortable. Well, it's hard to win when you're thinking about how you feel. What you really want to concentrate on is to keep executing whatever you need to get done to win, right? So you don't want to cloud your mind with thoughts that don't help the cause. And when you start off young like this, doing these things, you build a work capacity. You find training to be fun. You worked really hard since a young kid where, your legs are exhausted and can barely hold you up. So it doesn't seem like work when you have to do that to win. That was what play was your whole life growing up. And then, when Jesse's picking these movements like this, we're talking about like these strongman movements and stuff. Um, you know, it's awkward, odd movements. They have to learn to optimize and use their leverages and figure out what their leverages are. And that just makes them an athlete. Athletes are the individual that can figure out how to manipulate and use their body in a manner to achieve the goal. And this is where strength coaches who are good at what they do know that ultra high level athletes, we can always find dysfunction. The best athletes in the world hide that dysfunction very, very well, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So for people like Jesse, Chris, and I, when we see a high level athlete, we're looking for these little minute problems and breakdowns where we can tell there's an issue there that we need to fix. But the best athletes in the world they're very hard to find, right? So with young kids, just give them that work capacity, get them excited, get them fun, give them that discomfort, give them that ability to overcome uncomfortable feelings and realize that uncomfortable feeling isn't part of the equation to them, right? Like it's not like, oh, this is very uncomfortable. You thought football wasn't going to be uncomfortable. You thought wrestling wasn't going to be uncomfortable. You thought running, an ultra marathon wasn't going to be uncomfortable. All of it's uncomfortable. If it's not uncomfortable, you're not pushing hard enough. You're not going to win. You're not irrelevant in the game. But if you push hard enough, you will run into things that are uncomfortable. But if you're used to it, and that was just part of, like, to me, it was like, oh, my legs are throbbing. Well, that's part of me riding a bike and jumping a ramp, 300 times and going playing 3 hours of football. And then we wrestled, and then we, got into stuff. And then it's like, oh, who can throw a baseball farther? Like we got into a million different things by the end of the day. I earned that. It didn't bother me that my legs hurt. I was excited with what I accomplished. It wasn't part of the equation. I didn't sit there at the end of the day and go, okay, we're going to see who can throw a ball faster. I didn't sit there and make an excuse, go, well, guys, like we just played football for a few hours and I had to ride a bike over here and I had to do this. So I might not throw as far as I could. No kid does that. What do kids do? Pick up a ball, throw it as far as they got. All you have is what you have that day, right? And adults lose that somewhere along the line. If they never develop that strongly enough, that sensation, they lose that down the road and it becomes a problem when they become older and they are of age. They can be an athlete. They can accomplish high things or maybe go somewhere, maybe be a professional and make money off of it or get a scholarship, but they've lost the attributes that's required to compete at that level because they never solidified them at a young age. And if your kids aren't active enough to have the feelings I'm talking about, like what I had when I was a kid, find someone, like Jesse or Chris or I, to put them through workouts so they have those feelings, but workouts they're going to get excited about. There's enough variety. When Jesse brought out the log for those kids had no clue what that was going to feel like, the workout was going to feel like by the end of it. They were all excited, no matter what it was going to feel like, how hard it was going to be. They were excited because they got to do something the adults were doing, right? It's too late. It's just like CrossFit. You see a workout like, 20, 15, 9 thrusters, pull-ups. That doesn't seem hard at all. Great. I'm going to have to leave here and go to another gym, get a workout in. And the buzzer goes off, you go through it, you're laying on the ground gasping for air, and you're like, well, okay then, my teeth hurt for some reason. I don't know why, but when you go real intense, it's amazing the feelings you get, right? But that's the whole point. Start with kids at a young age doing these things.
I'll tell you the one
of my. Go ahead.
I was going to say the one thing I definitely didn't consider when I built those logs was the arm length to head size ratio is definitely different at 3 and 4 years old. And as they turned something over, I was like, oh man, I was like, there's like an inch of clearance over their heads for them to hold this because they have giant, humongous heads relative to the rest of their bodies. Like those whatever they are that sit on people's dashboards. You're like
bobbleheads,
yeah. Oh man, watching them put it overhead, I was like, "Whoo, that was lucky." Actually, I didn't really consider that it looks quite different at a 3-4-year-old than it does as an
Yeah.
adult. There's a lot more space there. Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, I'd say the proudest thing that I have about that my teens program is like if I have to go on the road, like they're bummed to miss sessions, and to me that's just a good sign. And some of the things you're talking about, Shane, like teaching people how to suffer is a trainable skill, and with but it's also got to be understood that it needs to be done in appropriate doses. Like if you make people suffer too hard too fast, even adults, especially deconditioned ones, like they're gonna be out. Whereas if you set them up for success, because don't get me wrong, every once in a while they walk in and I know like they've had some time off or we're getting ready, we're in preseason, like all of a sudden like nope, like we're getting at it today, and it's like but they get through it, and when they're done, they're happy about it, and then we switch gears on the next one. So you just gotta pick and choose those times. But if they're not excited to come, like that's a big problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a huge piece. And yeah, I mean, it's so critical. And Shane's right. Like you said earlier with the variety of the conjugate system, I was like, man, I can't imagine trying to manage youth or like, especially teens, like when you're starting to do barbell. So for us, like it's a lot of that play, like I talked about, through the ages up to 10 and 10 to 12, we're starting to blend that play with like, hey, we need to actually start to get the foundations of like controlling patterning, starting to understand that movement. So now we're starting to sumo deadlift with kettlebell, getting a little bit of sumo deadlift with barbell. We're box squatting with a kettlebell, just held like a goblet squat. I love box squat, man. So good. Like it's like for youth and stuff like that, the piece of having to show control and they just don't collapse to the bottom. And we'll do them as a group cadenced. So we would do like this last sort of month or so, we've done like 9 sets of 4 on the 45 seconds, KB goblet box squat, where they have to go and we work as a group, like military style, where like I'll call the like down and I'll call the up. And so we have to move smooth. So we're not like just bouncing through reps. They only do 4 before they get a rest. They're happy enough to like count, like, okay, who's calling 3, 2, 1, go on this next one. But they all have to sit on the box, knees out, feet flat, chests up. And then when everyone's done that, we stand. If someone's still not there, we wait for them to be in that position, then we stand. And it's just a great, box squat's such a great opportunity to start those basic principles of like controlling movement pattern and being less sort of that, what are those like Gumby looking air tube things you see at like the car dealerships, like less like that. And then by the time we get to teens, then now we're starting to do our teens program, because like where we are is such a crazy active area. Like everyone, kids are doing all of the things. They're rock climbing, they're skiing, they're in a million programs, they're playing volleyball. It's like everything all the time. So we do our teens program is 3 times a week. It's an hour 10 every session. And now we're getting into max lower, max upper, and dynamic lower. And that's our week in, week out. But the variety of that, those kids are there every time they can be there, because they're just excited. Kids love maxing out barbells for exactly what we've talked about. When they're like, they don't want to do 5 sets of 5. They want to see what the most they can do is. But the rule that's established always for us from 3 years on is if you cannot do it well, then you do not get to do it. So part of being able to lift that weight at all is not just having the strength to lift it, but you have to show that you can move it well. And either being not strong enough or not moving well enough are the things you get stopped for when we're maxing out. But we started this semester, start of September. We'll wrap it up mid-December before we break for Christmas and then start again in January. And we started week 1 maxing. Like we were max lower, max upper on the very first week, dynamic efforts on Fridays, and just straight into it. And just, again, we build 7 lifts. We try to get excellent movement out of it. They're learning to develop a plan. So now by early or mid-November, now all I'll do is I pick their heaviest weight based off the data from previous maxes. So I'll give them their chalkboard, write down their last number, and they have to build a plan of 7 lifts to get there, bring it to me, get me to like thumbs up it or be like, hey, like remember what we talked about? What are the principles and things we know about maxing out? Like the jumps have to be the same or less. It's 7 of them, and we only care about the last number. So that first number on that lift of like set of 7 is not meant to be very heavy. So we go from very light to our heaviest we can move. You're like, oh yeah, okay, go rewrite it, bring it back, show me again. And like that done week in, week out, I mean, they're building skill sets and knowledge that they're actually super excited about. And then when you get a new kid who joins, I mean, I don't have to be the only one giving information to them, right? So then not only are they excited to do it themselves, but they actually are capable of helping other kids and be like, oh yeah, no, you can't do it like that. Or, like it's not, you won't get there. It's going to be too much work. Like you're establishing like they're learning and they're getting stronger and they're excited about both things. I mean, frick, they're in school full time, like we're in jobs, like they're primed up to learn. Why wouldn't we take advantage of that opportunity?
You talk about something in there, or something you were talking about takes care of a kind of another discussion. One of the complaints that we hear about the conjugate system is like, well, here's why the people who squat every day, they squat, bench, and deadlift every day. They only do, the main movements. They like to complain and say, well, conjugate system doesn't work because how can you get someone started on it? Because there's too much variety and movement for an athlete to learn. Like we have, it takes us months and months and months and months to get someone to squat well. One, that's not our problem. Two, like it doesn't take me months and months to do that. Like we just said, like 10 minutes. They're gonna get someone who doesn't have mobility issues, and it doesn't take long, right, to get them to do a body weight squat. So I don't know where these people are having such a hard time teaching someone how to squat, but they still believe the only way to do it is by having them squat. So one of the complaints, like I said, is that people think that we have too much variety to teach new athletes or young kids, that we have to get them to do the same pattern over and over again. But what did Jesse talk about? Kettlebell. Have your hands on your knees, like like you're in a huddle position. Drop your hands, put on the kettlebell, stand up. What is that? That's a sumo deadlift. So it's a variety. That's not a sumo deadlift because there's a barbell and plate on each side. No, it's not. So it's a variation of a sumo deadlift. When Jesse's talking, doesn't it make sense? Like, oh yeah, teach a kid that, yeah, the kettlebell, then eventually they'll be able to do a barbell. Once they can do a barbell, they could do bands, they could do chains, doesn't really matter, right? There's all these variations. They can do deficits, they can do something that's higher off the ground, right? What we found, the problem is that coaches who say that just don't have the knowledge and background to understand that it's the variation that makes the movements easier. When a kid grabs a kettlebell and maybe the handle height is different, when they grab a barbell or they do a deficit or they do it off of pins, it only allows us opportunities to see if there is a weakness to maintaining position, or if there is a mobility issue where they can achieve positions on certain angles and other angles they can't. Because once we know that, we'll use accessory movements, more variety, not just doing squat, bench, and deadlift. And we'll use that more variety in accessory movements to fix and improve the patterns for the main movements. We'll fortify muscle groups to be strong enough, optimize leverages, get rid of dysfunction in joints, and then we'll have an athlete moving perfectly. But if all you have is a normal squat, bench, and deadlift, I think the problem that those coaches have in trying to get people to do these movements perfectly is they're trying to take an athlete who can't move perfectly and trying to teach them to do the movement perfectly, but they're not actually training them to actually fix the movement because they're not doing the accessory work to fix the problems. They're not doing enough variety in their squat, bench, and deadlift variations to fix the problems. So therefore, the problem's not going to get fixed. No wonder why it takes them 6 months or a year to figure out how to teach someone how to squat properly, right? If I did it that way, it would take me forever too. But for us, what we can do is every child, every kid, every adult is going to have some movement they pick up. Let's say that adult's they're having a hard time picking up a sumo deadlift. Well, we can do the same thing. Let's take them up. Hey, you ever been in a huddle before? Put your hands on your knees. You've been in a huddle before. All right, let's take this heavy kettlebell. Next thing you know, they're doing the kettlebell. Like, that feels good. Okay, now they have a reference. They have a feeling like this is how you deadlift. See the way your hamstrings pulled, your glutes kicked in, and your midline maintained position. Your head was neutral. These are all the same principles. Now let's go back over that barbell. Let's hold on, and I want you to search for that same feeling. But if you hadn't have variety, what feeling can you search for? You're searching for a feeling that doesn't exist in your mind. We can break down accessories and break down each individual little piece and component of that full movement so you can feel all of it. We can come up with different varieties. Like Jesse talking about the box squat. Well, if all you do is squat, and people who usually train without doing accessories and they don't believe in the conjugate system usually don't believe in box squatting also. All of us here probably found it's probably the easiest variation of a squat to teach. but it also, in my mind, shows me the most problems the fastest and easiest, right? And it shows problems that slows it down. So you can point out, hey, did you feel yourself slide forward before you stood up? Yeah, I felt that. You felt like you had a little more pressure in your knees when you did that. Yep, correct. We don't want you to do that. But right now, on the next one, I want you to try to keep that from happening. Contract your hamstrings as hard as you can. Try to get your hips to leave the box before and not let your knees shift forward. And so the next time they do it, say there's a 20% improvement. They still shifted forward. Okay, by cue, I know we could fix 20% of that. They know, technique-wise, how to optimize the movement. Now it's up to me as a coach to bring in other new movements and other accessories to fix the weakness in their hamstrings so they don't slide forward. So it tells us everything we need to know. We adjust the accessories, we adjust the future. We don't just randomly throw out there like, oh, we're going to do this main movement today. We can look at and see how the class is moving. Jesse can go, okay, people are really good at these movements in squat, these variations of squat, or these variations of deadlifts. These are the variations of squat and deadlifts that are suffering, that aren't as good. Why? Why is that the case? Maybe we need to adjust our technique a little bit. How would we know that they're not good at those positions if we didn't have a variation to put them in positions that test different angles and different types of strengths and weaknesses and different ranges of motion? Straight weight comes on in different places than chain does. That comes on in different areas than bands do. Bands to the bottom comes on differently than reverse bands. But with all these positional changes and all these variations of tensions and pressures coming on, you can't hide a weakness, right? And with these kids, we've said this on other episodes, gym should be an educational facility. As a coach, you're an educator. You're not just coaching someone, you're teaching them. I want my athletes to understand why they're doing what they're doing. It only builds a bigger unity between me and the athlete, which gives them a higher level of success. It also, the more they trust in the words that I say, the more they're going to listen, the more they're going to understand them and know them. When they're at the point like Jesse's kids telling the other kids, like, hey, here's some things you need to do or look out for. Now you'll overhear them and like, okay, good, they know it, they got it. Then that kid, they want to be the same way. They don't want to just lift the same weight. They want to learn so they can give information so they feel like they finally made it. Like, hey, I've finally earned enough. I have a reputation around here that I can teach help people with certain movements because I've earned that right by listening to Jesse, by executing the movements to the best of my ability, and becoming a student of my sport. And then that is now the expectation in the gym. When a kid comes in, they don't want to just beat someone at a deadlift, squat, or bench. They want to be the best in there at that, but they also want to learn too and be the most knowledgeable in there because now that is part of the requirement, not just moving the weight. Okay. But when you limit your movements and you do what a lot of different people, like starting strength, for example, if you use something like starting strength, they're very limited on movements, very easy for weaknesses to hide, very hard to fix them, because if you have glaring weaknesses, if you've been squatting for 2-3 years, how are you supposed to fix them with squatting for 2 or 3 more years? They were still there before. You have to have variety. But Jesse's talking about getting these kids good at technique with variation before we even get into the main movements that people are used to utilizing. They know when leverages feel good, when they feel bad. They know when they feel strong. They know when they feel weak. And what does a kid who knows when they feel strong and weak look for? If they go to deadlift, even without correcting, they're like, oh, that didn't feel right. They might not know the correction, but they know when it doesn't feel right. They know to look for something, So they can come to Jesse, I just pulled that. Something just didn't feel right in that. I didn't feel strong. Okay, well, let me take a look at your next one, and we can correct it. So I think it's really cool, the psychological development of athletes when they have variety and how we fix these issues. I find it very interesting how some strength coaches don't think you should have that much variety because you can't get good at something without that variety. I find it's the only way to get great at something is all that variety. We make sure we clear every type of dysfunction we could potentially have and get kids to truly physically and psychologically understand every inch of range of motion through everything we require from them. And then we optimize them for that position. So I love the thought process of what this does for kids and like what Jesse's doing at his gym and Chris, and we all have our different ways to get there. But what you'll notice is variety, be in a good shape, don't miss movements. Quality movements is number one. That is always what we don't stop on when you're about to miss a weight. We stop when your technique is about to not be perfect anymore. If that happens to be you're at 100% of your output, awesome. If it's 80% of your output, that's where it's at, and we'll take care of the rest with accessories.
Yeah, Jesse, one of the things I like too is you talked about you only get to lift with what looks good. And sometimes I feel like there's coaches that want to try to make people happy. I think when you're tracking numbers in the way that you did, I think that's a way to really set yourself up for success, because we do the same thing, and I learned that from you. You take the whiteboard out, you got a record. We keep ours in sugar wad. That's like a big rule. Like if you're gonna be here and you're gonna lift and train, like I need to know what your numbers are, and so that's what we track it on. So we kind of set up and give them kind of an idea, have them write out a plan, and even when they're getting, and when you do it right, they're going to get 5-pound PRs or something, and you're going for just reasonable goals. And when they just see even a 5-pound growth, it's like, ooh, I got a better one. Whereas like when you're just doing it blindly and it's like, oh, that doesn't look good anymore, like stop there. Like, to me, that's not really psychologically setting them up for as much success. Whereas like, hey, we're going to have a number, and if we've done our job, well, they're going to hit that number. And not that it always works out that way, but I would say it works out a lot more that way than it doesn't, when you just, follow the system, which, I use the same pattern that you do. We do 3 times a week, an hour and 10, hour and 15 minutes. And, I've noticed that the kids have kind of, calmed down about just trying to blindly hit numbers, because now it's just focused on, hey, if you just get a little better this week, that'll lead to big things down the road. And that's just built up enough trust where they're not really.
Yeah, I think that tracking is huge, because that is definitely a side of it. Like if I've got their numbers and I've laid out their programming for the week, and I can scroll back through the programming and be like, well, 2 weeks ago, this person hit such and such on the mega bow. This week, I'm going to choose that they're going to use a bow bar. And based off of that, we're going to shoot for a 5-pound PR. It does take the edge off of making poor choices. And because given the opportunity, there's definitely when the gate gets left open, you're going to end up with a bunch of animals out there in the field, and with that, like if you could set the number for them and be able to be like, hey, last time you hit 330 on your mega bow squat, like this time we're going for 335 on this bow, that they'll accept that, instead of being like, well, like what do I want, like. And then for us, I mean, because of those changes, I anticipate PRs for every athlete every time across the board, because I'm selecting the bar for them and the weight for them that they will be successful at, and we're picking the lifts we do based off of those things. So when they come in, and every Monday and Wednesday when they max a bar, they're successful. I mean, the motivation continues to like uptick real fast for them to not miss any of those sessions and be there. Okay, you know what? We've got about a solid hour here of just youth let's split it up. We're going to split it up. So we're going to leave it at youth for this episode, and we're going to tie into the Masters and the other side, just so we can give sort of like equal time to talk about those specific things, and also run an episode that maybe is a little shorter and more length palatable. So I guess if we're going to wrap with youth today, then things that are, what is the cap? What is the overall pieces?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, understanding that these are skills that are going to set the kids up for life. So in order to do that, we need to make sure that we don't create negative connotations of them walking into a gym. Like we want them to be excited. And the way you do that is by having fun, first and foremost. So you do that with, and you can do all sorts of GPP, just like we talked about, and the stuff that you're doing, Jesse, with the strongman. And as they start to develop, better body awareness and they're building more work capacity, now we can start to develop more of the, strength components and, slowly build them up, but keeping in mind that this is still for lifelong health and not a 16-year-old, trying to necessarily get to the games.
And the higher the more variation we have available, the more opportunity for wins there are for a broader population in the gym, which gives more opportunity for a higher population in the gym of kids to want to do this for a lifelong thing. People have to have a win somewhere,
Yep. Not specializing too early, learning and passing that knowledge along, so kids are fired up and having a great time. I think no matter, being longevity and health and setting them up for fitness as being a major component of their life, always, or producing like, top tier national, international, Olympic athletes. I think that path is the same. Just have fun with them. Let them build a big base. Like, don't be afraid to play and just enjoy that time. No matter how old they are, it's valuable. Yeah, let's leave it there. We'll pick up with Masters on the next episode.
Sounds good.
Okay. Cheers, fellas.
Conjugate Nation Podcast.